All right, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Wolf of Young Street podcast. My name is Victor. I'm your host. Today, I've got a guest. John Graham is back, you guys. Badass granddad himself. He is a 15-year veteran of the United States Foreign Service. He used to be on George Bush's no-fly list for being a threat to national security. So I interviewed John a few months ago when Trump was first elected. You guys can go watch that episode after this. John's got many stories of war and near-death experiences. I had to get John back on here because Trump has been doing some things. He's been cooking, and I want to know how John's feeling about Donnie's cooking. So let's start there. You're American. Over the first 100 days of the Donald Trump administration so far, how have you been feeling about it?
I've been feeling very poorly about it. He's done everything he says he wanted to do from Project 2025. It isn't that these are surprises. He told us he was going to do this, and he's doing it as fast as he possibly can. I'm deeply disappointed in the cowardice in our legislature. The Senate and the House of Representatives have allowed him to trample roughshod over the Constitution and even take away their power to do what he wants. Our only the biggest obstacle to him now is our court system, and there have been all kinds of lower court rulings against most of what he wants to do. For example, closing agencies when he doesn't have the constitutional right to do so, breaking every law on the books to deport migrants without due process, cutting the budgets for programs that deal with LGBTQ issues, and attacking anything he views as, quote, woke, that is to say, progressive in thought, in every agency he can get his hand on. Key thing now, as far as I'm concerned, is what happens at the Supreme Court, because these court cases at the lower level are pretty much all going against him. They're all defending the Constitution. For example, our Constitution gives Congress, namely mostly the House of Representatives, the power of the purse, that is to say, the right to dispense money. And Trump has taken that away from them. But because the people that run our House of Representatives are totally in his thrall, they're total toadies, if you will, they're allowing him to do it. So the key thing now is, as these things move up to the Supreme Court, what will the Supreme Court do? There's some indications that at least some of the conservative members of our Supreme Court might in fact fight back, but it's not at all certain that that's going to happen. So at the moment, we're dealing with someone who's basically out of control and pushing the envelope any way he can until someone stops him. That's been his modus operandi since he was a businessman in New York. He just keeps breaking laws until someone puts a foot in his face, and that hasn't
happened. John's actually not. It's not condoning violence. If that's it, he's not condoning violence. That's just a matter of speech.
It's a matter of speech. Yeah, it's someone until someone stops him. He's going to keep doing it, and he's been that guy since he was a businessman. So it's not like it's surprising. But so far, relatively few people have been heroic. And we've been trying to tell their stories on my organization, the Giraffe Heroes Project. I urge people to go to the Giraffe Heroes Project and look at some of the most recent people that we've honored for sticking their necks out. That's what we call the Giraffe Heroes Project, because we find people sticking their necks out, hence the metaphor, and we make them as famous as we can. And in many cases, many of them are doing brave things to call Trump to account, or like the president of Harvard, telling him he can take his unconstitutional demands on Harvard and put it where the sun doesn't shine. I hope that's not too offensive.
No, that one's fine. That one's fine. The
president of Harvard, Mr. Garber, told Trump he could take his attacks and put them there. And other universities have now finally assembled the courage. Some 200 universities now have signed on to a common platform of fighting back.
Yeah, I want to quickly jump in there because I want to know which of these things that you've seen from Trump bothers you the most. As a person who has served your country and seen your country go through different precedents like that.
I find his domestic policies most disturbing. I don't like a lot of his foreign policies, but on the other hand, he's done some things in foreign policy that a Democratic president might have done. Getting our allies in Europe to pay more for their own defense, for example, a tough line on China. That's been kind of, in my view, long overdue. I'm not saying a global trade war is a good thing, but on the other hand, taking a tougher line on China was overdue. I think that a hard line toward Iran could very well work. I mean, there's got to be something to push the Iranians toward accepting a new nuclear deal so they don't develop nuclear weapons. The tariff program, it's like a bait and switch. It's like a carnival. One day there's going to be 145% tariffs, the next day it's 30. I mean, it's like bong, 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 bong. But Trump's attitude is just not to play the game the same way anyone else plays the game, but he play it as a wild man, as a crazy man, and to some extent, he may actually get some decent results out of that just by scaring the you-know-what out of people to give us a better trade deals. Especially when they might be propping up their own industries at our expense. So I'm saying that, okay, I don't like his foreign policy much, but it's not a disaster. Here at home, it's different. The stuff he's doing here, for example, now there seems to be a serious move to cut Medicaid, which is our health program for poorer people. And he's cutting it by something like $800 billion, close to $1 trillion. And the whole idea is to free up money so that he can give enormous tax breaks for the rich. That really does disturb me, because I think in this country, in America, so much of the problem stems from rampant inequality. It's not just racial; it's economic. It's a rich versus poor, and we're becoming two nations: a rich nation and a poor nation, with very little in the middle. And everything Trump is doing, and now he wants to give enormous tax breaks for the rich, so that they can further cement the control over the rich over everybody else. That's the real problem. And that's where he has simply got to be stopped. There's got to be something something that serves the needs of the people as a whole. The interesting thing, Victor, is that, of course, many of the people that he's hurting with his economic policies are precisely the people in the states that voted for him. So this is where it gets very interesting, because there are midterm elections now in just a year and a half. And a whole lot of people that voted for Trump are going to see their health care disappear. They're going to see the price of their groceries escalate beyond which they can afford. They're going to see their student loan debt pile up. They're going to see all kinds of things that make them poor and more desperate, all caused by Trump's policy. So will they vote for him? Will they vote for MAGA Republicans in 2026 when the MAGA Republicans, that is to say the Trump Republicans, are really screwing them? It's amazing, because you talk to all kinds of people, of course, are running around talking to these people. They're all people that live from paycheck to paycheck, God bless them. And they haven't got any savings at all. They're living in poor conditions. They voted for Trump because they felt that he was the only person who could pull them out of the morass they're in. Now he's digging the hole deeper for them, but will they react? A whole lot of people interview these people, and they sort of shrug their shoulders and say, oh, yeah, I'm suffering, and I guess I'll suffer more, but gee whiz, Trump's a good guy. In the end, he's going to save my butt. Well, maybe he won't. All he cares about is himself and his rich friends. Sooner or later, the poorer people living in our red states, that is to say, the states dominated by Trump politics, sooner or later they're going to figure it out, aren't they? I mean, all of us are in the progressive part of the country are sort of shaking our heads saying, God, you people that voted for Trump, I get that some of you are just ideological diehards, and that's fine. Every country has diehards from the right and the left. But, as you see what's happening, I mean, wake up. This is not in your interest. I get that you want to slam the liberals. You want to own the libs. You want to shut down these leftist universities. I get all that, and I'm not surprised by it. but he's shutting down your own clinics. And when he starts throwing all these people back to their home countries, I mean, some of your listeners probably don't realize that in the American South, which is very much heavily in Trump country,
Yeah.
the only way you can get to a rural doctor is through a rural clinic. And the only people that are doctors in rural clinics, well, no American doctors are going to do that. So the doctors there from Bangladesh and the Philippines, they're all being thrown out, told to go home. So that poor people in Louisiana may have to drive 150 miles to set a broken arm because Trump has kicked their family doctor out of the country because he's black or brown or from the wrong country.
I did want to ask a question about that though, just historically, because as I said, you've seen quite a few precedents, right? You were up there you were there with Nixon and I think Carter as well, and quite a few after that. So, I'm curious, have you ever experienced anything quite like this? Anything quite like Trump?
Oh no, no, and I'm not old enough in a way. It did happen sort of once before, but that was in the 1890s, the so-called Gilded Age, Gilded Era in American politics, when you had rich barons like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and stuff, who owned most of the industry in the country and were filthy, filthy rich, and poor people were suffering, and there were no child labor laws. Women had no voting rights, etc. It was a really miserable situation for 10 and 20 years, and a huge and growing gulf between the rich and the poor. But that was, 130 years ago. And what happened was people finally woke up and people began to march for change. And so we finally got some progressive presidents like Teddy Roosevelt, for example, to some extent Woodrow Wilson, and other presidents in the first part of the last century that got some laws passed that outlawed, for example, child labor, gave women the vote, tried to do all kinds of things that would create some balance between rich and poor. Then, of course, as things began to slide back, we had the Great Depression and Franklin Roosevelt, who in fact set us on a New Deal, which lasted for 50, 60 years to great benefit, in my view. So I was around for parts of that. I was born in 1942. But in terms of Trump, no. I mean, even people keep saying, well, look at Richard Nixon. Well, yeah, Richard Nixon did his best, but he didn't come anywhere close to what Trump did. And not only that, but Nixon famously tried to hide it all, whereas Trump doesn't even bother to do that.
Doesn't even bother.
He's right out in your face saying, hey, I'm going to cheat and lie. I mean, you see him on an interview show, for example, it's one lie after the other. And the poor interviewer says, Mr. President, that's just false. And he will just roll right over them and he'll say the same lie again. And then he'll say it a third time. And I think it was Goebbels, the Hitler's propaganda chief, who said, if you repeat a lie enough, people start to believe it. And Trump totally gets that. He repeats his lies often enough. For example, that he won the last election before this one, the 2020 election. He keeps repeating that he won it, even though there isn't a shred of evidence that he did. And still 30% of the population thinks Trump won the election in 2020 for president, just because he repeats the lie so often and on every social media channel he can find. I mean, and again, if I'm on a rant here, another part of my rant, the biggest, the people I'm most angry with are in Congress, but after that come the media. I mean, this is utter BS in the media to say, oh, we have to be fair and balanced. So if we say anything negative about Trump, we have to say something negative about Democrats. No, you don't. Truth is truth. I mean, if too few of our media, our major media, are brave enough to even use the word lie, to use the word corruption. Increasingly, it's getting a little better because the situation's getting so bad. But for so long, they didn't even use the word lie. They would say, well, Mr. Trump, we're not so sure that that's factual. Instead of saying, look, you son of a bitch, this is a lie. I mean, you and I might have said that, but so the media are getting, but they, in many ways, I credit the media with putting Donald Trump into power because they were really naive and really cowardly in terms of calling a spade, of calling him out on his lies, of calling him out on his corrupt practices.
To be fair, I don't know that. I think they had sown enough distrust in the media that even if the media had tried to say anything, as people just don't distrust the media enough that it's just not going to work, right?
True, they have, and nobody trusts the media now, and for good reason. But that's because it's so full of lies that it's very hard to know what the truth is. A lot of what we
Yeah.
do in the Giraffe Heroes Project is try to teach people, especially young people, to separate what the truth is. If there's a sensitive issue, well, then don't just look at MSNBC, don't just look at Fox News, go to smaller, more reputable sources and try to find a balanced view. I mean, is this new edict on deportation, is the news you're hearing accurate or is it a lie? If you go to 3 or 4 sources, you might find the truth. But if you just listen to Fox News, you'll get a lie. And if you listen to some sites on the left, you'll get this frantic attack that also doesn't do a lot of good either. We're looking for calm voices speaking the truth. And that's one thing I like about the election of the new Pope, because a couple of days ago, he gave a very important talk to the world's journalists. And basically, he said that. He says what's really important is the truth. You people just tell the truth.
Yeah. I want to jump in there because I want to get your sense of how do you feel about immigration in general in terms of well, I guess mass immigration and illegal immigration, because in my mind there needs to be a balance, right? The borders cannot not function, because that's how you get a breakdown of fundamental I guess resources to cater to your citizens. But at the same time, on a humanitarian level, on certain levels, it is also important to allow people to be able to move and to be able to find better situations for themselves. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, they very much parallel what you just said, and the solution has been evident for decades. I mean, there's even draft legislation drafted by both Republicans and Democrats going back 10 years as to what the solution should be, and it's pretty much what you were getting at in the remarks you just made. Yes, there has to be secure borders. No country can exist with totally open borders. But at the same time, every country has a right to establish some criteria and limitations. So what should the United States do? Well, we should have an immigration policy in which a lot of it is centered on the kinds of people that our economy really needs. Some of those are unskilled, farm laborers, for example, people that pluck chickens or sew stuff or whatever. It's important to have those elements into our economy, jobs that Americans aren't taking. At the same time, at the higher end, it's important to have some highly skilled people. For example, people that might go to work in Silicon Valley. It's important to import professional people like doctors. We're talking about the doctors being the only medical people there are in rural places like in Louisiana and Mississippi. So there are certain classes of immigrants that American and the American economy really needs, and we should welcome them.
Yeah.
That said, let me just finish here. That said, some family members, but not too many. I mean, back when I was a consular officer, if you were a great grandmother's cousin or something, you could get in. So that's too much. But immediate family should be allowed into the workers. So that's part of it. That's maybe, I don't know, 60-70% of our immigration quotas should be people whom we really need in this country, and will do a great job and will pay taxes and benefit. As to the rest of it, there should be a strong segment of humanitarian and refugee openings, just as that statue in New York Harbor says at its base, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses," or whatever it says. America's always been that. So a good hunk of the people we take in, I don't know, 20%, something like that, should be, you don't care what they offer the economy. They're desperate. They're fleeing violence, or they're fleeing global warming. Their fields have dried up whatsoever. And whatever. And America and all Western nations should open our borders. Not completely, of course. There's got to be limits, and we should set those limits. But the limits should be high for humanitarian reasons. And so, you've hinted at this, and the American Congress has known this for decades. two main components for immigration policy. One should be, let's bring in the people that our economy really needs, and second, let's honor that plaque at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty, and taking in as many people as we think we can settle who are coming from desperate situations just because it's the right thing to do.
Here's where I want to go with this next, and this is something that is pretty personal to you. There have been a slew of executive orders recently, well, not recently, since Trump took office the second time. And one of those executive orders actually renamed a mountain that's probably near and dear to your heart, Mount McKinley. So I wanted to kind of quickly get a sense of, obviously you were part of the first ascent up the north face of Mount McKinley, and then it got renamed and all of that. So you have history there. How were you feeling when you heard about that?
I'm insulted. I mean, who does this guy think he is? He hasn't climbed a hill in his life, let alone a big dangerous mountain. It's true. When we made the first ascent, which has now become one of the most iconic climbs in North American mountaineering. When we climbed the mountain, it was in fact McKinley, but he was a nondescript president that lived in 1895, whatever. And Trump likes him because he presided over the Gilded Age. He tried to shovel as much money as he could to the rich people of the day and to hell with everybody else. That's why Trump loves him, because Trump sees himself as another McKinley. Denali, of course, is the native name for that mountain, and I much prefer the native name. I would love it, for example, if they would rename the mountain in my backyard Mount Rainier. I mean, Rainier was a lieutenant on Captain Vancouver's ship. I think he was the navigator or something, or maybe he was a friend of the family. And name it by its native name, which is Dahoma. Just something that honors the Native Americans that we basically did a genocide on in order to take the entire continent, not just here, but in your country as well, in Canada. We both have some shame there. And that's, those are important things. I mean, it's like, yeah. And in terms of the other thing that annoys me is that the Biden administration demanded that the names of a lot of American military installations be changed because they were built and named by Southern racists back in 1920, 1930. For Camp Appy Hill, Fort Bragg, etc. These are all Confederate generals who fought against the United States. We shouldn't name our military establishments after them. So Biden renames them over America's real heroes, including some females and some people of color. And Trump, of course, has undone all that because that's too woke. And he wants to stamp out every last bit of wokeness in the United States. I mean, what's woke? I mean, is woke giving people a fair shot who have a different color skin than I do? Is that woke? Well, then I'm woke. I mean, there's a whole lot of progressive things that need doing.
I actually want to ask you something quick there, because you are alluding a little bit to the policy on DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is supposed to, like, as you say, try and give people of color a fair shot. A lot of people, especially white people, feel like, well, there's poor people on that side too, right? There's people who they're not historically disadvantaged in that way, but they're also facing severe conditions right now. They're in dire straits right now. So why should this person get, say for example, get into a job in the interest of preserving diversity, equity, and inclusion when they have the same circumstances?
Victor, you're stealing all my lines. Stop it. I agree with you. I've always been a little bit silent about DEI policies because I felt for a long time that they've gone too far. They have just gone too far. I think that it's important to have some DEI policies, for example, to recognize that it might be a really good idea to have some modest affirmative action in our best colleges, for example, with the DEI policy. But in California, for example, which does a lot of experimenting, they have not had affirmative action, DEI, university DEI, for a long time. And instead, they've used other ways of achieving the same thing, like, for example, free tuition for people at the lower end of the economic spectrum. So anyway, so my view is
That's your ringtone?
Yeah, it's a motorcycle. Yeah,
I love that.
Anyway, Harvard has just done, for example, the richest university in the country, has just done a marvelous thing. They basically said your family income should have no bearing, zero, on whether you come to Harvard. If you can't afford it, you come free, and that's enormous. That's enormous. And not only that, but schools, and Harvard's not the only one. They send teams of people into areas of the country that are poorer than other areas. And instead of looking for the person that can throw a football the best or hit a three-pointer the best, they're looking for diamonds in the rough who are people of real promise, young men and young women, black, brown, white, whatever, poor, who with a little help could really need a leg up. And so what Harvard does, if necessary, they offer these people like a year or even 2 years of remedial work to get them ready so that they don't just flunk out. If they're just thrown into Harvard's freshman class, they won't be able to keep up because their high school has been so substandard. So Harvard trains them so that they can enter Harvard's freshman class, and then they come to Harvard and pay no tuition. I mean, these are the ways to go about it. So anyway, I have always had a mixed view on DEI. I don't go nearly as far as some of my more radical and progressive friends. I'm more conservative than they are in a lot of ways. And I think, for example, I think there's some of the examples that have come up just in this spring, for example, of some hiring practices where, in point of fact, the truth of the matter is that some people who did not meet important criteria for a certain job were hired over some people who did meet important criteria. And I think that's wrong. So I think merit is extremely important. And that is, I think you pointed out and used the word correctly, balance. There needs to be a balance between having merit-based hiring and acceptances and DEI considerations. So it needs to be a balance. And in some cases, people have gone too far. Oh, I know what really annoys me. The DEI policy is called, what are they called? Trigger. Wherever a professor is supposed to warn people before a class on a subject that might offend someone.
Trigger warning?
Trigger warnings, yes. I think that is so absurd. I mean, I get infuriated just when I hear about it. What the hell?
You don't like a trigger warning, John?
No. What if you're going to go to a university where ostensibly the whole purpose is to look for truth, and you're going to be offended because someone says I don't know, something will offend you because it's violent, or they're quoting someone who said a sexist remark, or maybe use the N-word or something. I mean, no, the trigger warnings are and anything like them are going way too far.
Yeah. Here's where I wanna go next, though. So one of the things I want to get to the Canadian perspective here. Trump, and this is something that Trump has been saying a lot. He has been talking about how Canada would be best served as the 51st state of the United States. I can see you going off on that. So I want to hear. What do you think? Do you think it's as good an idea as he's suggesting? Will we get better healthcare if we became part of the United States?
No, I mean, I would benefit. I could get whatever medicines I need at 1/10 of the cost. I could go up to Vancouver and get my ulcer or something healed for your public health care, whatever. Yeah, it would be great for me. But the idea, the insult to Canadians. I mean, I live close to the Canadian border, and I'm well aware you Canadians are a very proud people, and justifiably so. And you share so much of our history. I mean, it's interesting what happened over the weekend, the Toronto Blue Jays played the Seattle baseball team.
Yeah.
And when that happens, thousands of people, literally thousands of people, drive south from Vancouver to Seattle to watch the games and root for the Canadian team. And that's great to see them because, we really are. What's the phrase? Sons and daughters of the same something, whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
I've never seen any difference. And we make fun of each other and have fun trying to imitate a Canadian accent. And
Exactly.
no, I mean, but from the Canadian point of view, I would be just horribly insulted. 51st state, Jesus Christ! I mean, you do so many things in Canada better than we do down here. Not all, but certainly your healthcare system is way better than ours. So yeah, it's Donald Trump. I mean, it's like he wants to buy Greenland. He wants to take over Canada. He's crazy. I mean, but his craziness is who he is.
Yeah, but what do you think the end goal? What is his end game in the end? Because at some point I thought it was about restoring manufacturing to the U.S. and bringing back those jobs. But if that was the case, tariffs would be in effect and they would stay on. None of this flip flopping, right? So because what the problem with putting tariffs on and taking them off repeatedly like that is that, well, it doesn't give those businesses certainty to actually do anything, to actually do what he wants, which is move production over. And if he's talking now about all these deals that they're going to make with all these countries, well, if the pipeline is still going to be open for them to, if the idea is just to balance trade, then, well, that doesn't necessarily bring manufacturing back to the U.S., right? You get my reasoning there.
No, I get your reasoning, but you're talking like sane people talk. The way sane people negotiate tariffs is what you're talking about. We have a problem. Let's sit down and talk about it. You make this widget better than we do, but we make this widget better than you do. So maybe we trade, maybe we have a little tariff, whatever. We talk it through. That's the way it's always been. Not always. There's been trade wars a century ago, for example, in the 1920s. But what Trump's doing is deliberately trying to terrify people. And the back and forth you talk about is a deliberate move to terrify people and to completely unsettle business people who demand some kind of consistency because they have to deal with long supply chains. If you have to order parts that take 3 months to get here from someplace else, and Trump is changing his tariff policy 6 times in that time span, I mean, you go crazy. And so basically you just shut down. You can't take the risk. Then when you're desperate enough, Trump will come to you and say, are you desperate enough now? I'm like, you think I'm crazy enough now? Okay, now let's talk. I want this and this and this. And by then you're just throwing up your hands. But I think you're getting smarter now. I don't know what kind of a deal the Brits just made with the U.S., but their trade with us is relatively minor. It's going to be a much harder deal to make with Europe. And quite frankly, I think the Chinese have been outsmarting us for decades. And I don't think for a minute that the Chinese are getting a bad deal. I don't understand all of it. It's incredibly complicated.
Right.
But I don't think the Chinese need any help at all in dealing with Donald Trump because they're smarter than he is. But the backing and forthing and stuff this is a case where his wildness is absolutely deliberate. He wants to completely unsettle people. That he's been doing that again since his career as a business person in New York City. It's the way he operates. Okay, I'm a wild man. Deal with a wild man. Well, so if you deal with tariffs the way people used to deal with tariffs, which is to be relatively polite and express your political view and your economic view, and to maybe make a veiled threat here or there. I mean, but it's the game. Everybody played the game, but now Trump is saying, I ain't playing that game. I'm starting a whole new game. It's called Crazy Trump. Deal with it.
Yeah. Here's where I wanted to talk about something else that you've done, like in your history as well. You were part of the nuclear planning group, and at the UN, right? So recently we had like a skirmish between, and that hopefully that doesn't escalate any further, between Pakistan and India.
Yeah.
two countries that own nuclear weapons. And for me, it was like, I I guess where I'm going with this is, at some point, I guess some of them were, no, both of them were talking about the conditions under which they would use nuclear weapons. Is there a, when two countries are kind of talking like that, is there a, what is the responsibility of the rest of the world, when two countries are kind of posturing like that? The United States, for example.
Yeah, I think the responsibility of the rest of the world is to get them to stop and back down, because, as we all know, you can start a nuclear war in Kashmir, and in all the war games I was ever part of at the Pentagon, for example, you could start a little nuclear war in a place like Kashmir, or maybe, I don't know, someplace in the Middle East, with just a few bombs going off, and within 3 or 4 days, the whole world would be a smoking ruin. There was no way to stop it. There was no way to stop the escalation. It just automatically escalated, as people were afraid of losing their nuclear weapons, or they fired them before they lost them, etc. Mistakes. I mean, it's an extremely dangerous situations, and especially in where you're dealing with India and Pakistan. Now, those are two relatively smart countries, but they don't have the restrictions, and they haven't developed the safeguards that the United States and Russia developed, that kept us alive during the Cold War. Both the United States and Russia behaved relatively responsibly, if you will, given the fact that we had thousands of warheads and none of them went off for all those years. Well, Pakistan and India, they haven't got thousands, but they've each got a couple hundred, and that's more than enough to start World War III. So the rest of the world has got to really come down hard and say, stop it. And if you don't believe me, then we'll impose economic sanctions, or we'll create pressures in the Security Council, and other stuff that you won't like. And what are you doing this for? Well, you're doing it because you started fighting in 1947 because the Brits partitioned South Asia in such a way that was really stupid, so that Muslims were caught on the wrong side of the border, and Hindus were caught on the wrong side of the border, and it was with great pain and a lot of violence that things began to sort themselves out. And so you've got all these difficult religious feelings, which have been exacerbated by ideologues on both sides, especially Modi in India. And now you've got ostensibly a fight developing over what, I don't know how many acres it is, how many square miles. I've been to Kashmir. It's, I don't know, maybe the size of Rhode Island at best. It's a small part. It's a beautiful part. I mean, if you've never been there, I urge you to go there. Kashmir is beautiful, but it's a relatively small part of South Asia, and they're fighting over this tiny bit of territory, and they can't get over their religious altercation, Muslim and Hindu, and then finally there's all the hurt and pain that goes back to 1947 and their initial wars, caused by the stupid separation process the British tried to put into effect in those years.
Yeah,
all of which is no excuse to blow the world up.
Yeah, no, probably not. Probably not worth it in the end. But here's another interesting character I want to ask you about. I don't know if you've heard of the current head of state of Burkina Faso. His name is Ibrahim Traore.
Yeah,
there are many people that say he's very similar to, in his country's history, to a general called to a captain called Captain Sankara. But I don't know if you're familiar with Gaddafi as well, the former head of state of Libya.
I was stationed at in Libya when he came to power, and so I know the situation very well.
Okay. So maybe I won't ask you about Ibrahim Traore. I'll ask you about Gaddafi then. There are people that there are conflicting stories about Gaddafi, right? Some people see him as a dictator, but I think historically, after a bit of time has passed on the history, some people are saying that maybe Gaddafi wasn't all he was painted out to be in Western media. So where do you land on that? Was he really the savior of his country that got away and got painted in a certain light, as some people are trying to say these days, or was he really the dictator and the mass murderer that people like to say?
Well, I know we're maybe running out of time in this broadcast, so I urge people to read that chapter of my memoir, Quest, Risk, Adventure, and the Search for Meaning. Is a chapter on this whole issue of Gaddafi. And so I won't spend a lot of time on it, except to say that he's both of the things that you mentioned. He was born in a tent in Sirte, a young idealistic army officer, suffering from living in poverty, while the oil wealth in the country went into a few pockets in the army and in the old king. And he didn't like that much at all. So he and his friends plotted and overthrew the king. And his whole aim in the very beginning was justice. It was like 1776 in the United States, throwing off the king, giving power to the people. And one of the first things he did was raise the literacy rate in Libya from about 5% to 65% or whatever. He had an immediate positive impact on the social well-being of his people. Education and healthcare, for example, being key elements that greatly improved in his initial years. And then, I credit, no, I blame the West for not seeing what was going on there and supporting it. Instead, what mattered was that Gaddafi would be on our side in the Cold War. So we had under the old king an air base there, a NATO air base, and Gaddafi demanded that we get out of it, and that created an animosity with the United States that just got worse and worse. And by, what was it, 1970, the Pan Am 103 blown up over Scotland, an airplane by the Libyan secret services, and that really pissed the United States off, and things went downhill from there, and Gaddafi became a major sponsor of world terrorism. So that's where the second half of what you said is also true. Gaddafi became a major sponsor of terrorism, but he didn't start out that way. And then to his own people, I don't know whether it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll or whatever, but as he grew older, his mind began to fade or something. And he got very much into himself and got very defensive and saw enemies everywhere, palace intrigues, the like of it. And so he began to lose his hold on his own people. They were wildly enthusiastic about him when he came to power. But toward the end, they began to see him as what he had become, a corrupt tin pot dictator. And so all kinds of enemies popped up, and they eventually did him in. So both the things you said about Gaddafi are true. He started off as a patriot.
Yeah. So I asked that question because there's a new star coming out of Africa now, that Ibrahim Traore that I just told you about, the head of state of Burkina Faso. And there's a lot of enthusiasm about him and some of the things he's doing, which some say are pretty similar. I don't have the history here, but some say are pretty similar to what Gaddafi did in his time in terms of nationalizing resources and trying to disconnect from France as a colonial influence in his country. So and I mean, a lot of people have been saying that in the context of Africa, is that the only way for Africa to finally find its feet? And because there's talk that and again, this might be a conspiracy theory. There's people saying that, well, the retention of interest by the West in Africa is partly the reason why Africa hasn't developed, hasn't been able to grow and get to the points that it needs to get to. I wonder how you view that, and what the leaders need to be in Africa in order for Africa to actually develop.
Yeah, it's a complicated question, and I think my answer to it now is different than it was when I was as head of African affairs at the U.S. mission to the United Nations. Back in those days, there was a very heavy imprint on Africa from the colonial nations, either because many of those countries were still colonies, or the ones that were no longer colonies had created very shaky new governments run by people without a lot of competence to run anything, and so a lot of the initial attempts at freedom and independence in Africa ended in failure because not only because of Western meddling, but because wasn't a lot of competence in terms of building a leadership cadre. Well, how could there be? There wasn't much of an educational system in any of these places, and so there were relatively few trained people. Yeah, sure, you had some dozens of people who'd been educated at UC Berkeley or Oxford University come back, and they became ministers of this and that helped. But in the beginning, the colonial imprint was a major cause of the fact that Africa was going no place. The new countries often became corrupt and inefficient, and their economies never took off. Now it's different. I think that the impact of colonialism fades, and what you're dealing with now is great powers still meddling in Africa, but at least now the meddling is doing some good. And here I give the highest praise to the Chinese. A lot of their impact in Africa has been in soft power, in terms of education and health initiatives, not just building railroads and dams. And because the Chinese wanted to replace the colonials as the major influence in Africa, but replace them with soft power. That is to say, to build genuine friendships and allegiances and establish some trust for these countries, and then have that translate into economic and trade benefits as well. But so what? Okay. The U.S. has tried to follow suit, and Donald Trump, of course, has just ended all of that by abolishing our aid programs, which is the stupidest thing he's done in 5 months. But it's now much more up to the Africans, and there are some places in Africa, like in Burkina Faso, that are doing pretty well. And while there are a lot of problems, I think what's happening in South Africa is pretty well. In other cases, not so much. Zimbabwe, for example, is still suffering from one tin pot dictator after the other. Malawi, much better. So it's a mixed bag now. But I think African nations are doing better now in many ways, because the Cold War is over, and you haven't got the heavyweights of the world coming into Africa for the sole purpose of getting votes on their side in the Security Council. The heavyweights are coming into Africa. Sure, they're coming in to make a buck. Sure, what's wrong with that? But at the same time, they're also coming in, and the Africans are smart enough to say, yeah, okay, you want to mine cobalt from our mines? Then let's look for a longer-term relationship in which you support the school systems in our major countries, major cities, and establish rural healthcare clinics throughout every county in the country, et cetera, et cetera. And so the Africans are getting smarter and smarter about that. And at the same time, education levels in Africa, as you well know, have climbed remarkably since the days when I spent a lot of time in Africa. And so there are a lot more trained people with at least minimum high school educations. And there are some pretty darn decent universities and colleges now springing up in places like Sierra Leone. And other places where they're turning out some of their own fairly highly trained people. So things are looking better. It's no longer automatic now that left on their own, Africans will always fail. It's not true anymore. Some of them are doing okay, some not so much, but it's better. It's better.
Right. Thanks, John, for saying that. So John's got many stories like that, and if you wanna read a bit more about his story, you should grab his book Quest. I've read the book, and that was all of the first interview I did with John was a lot of that was starting the story from the beginning there. So you guys can go watch that. But thanks, John, for coming on the show again. Thank you for sharing your stories and your insights. As always, it's very much appreciated. I know we always say we'll talk for that 30 minutes. The last time it was 2 hours. This time we're doing a little bit better. It's just a little bit over an hour. So thank you for your patience. Yeah.
Hey, you're a great interviewer, and it's infectious talking with you. I love it. So yeah, let's at least wait 6 months or something. I'll come back on, tell some stories I haven't said. Whatever.
All right.
But thanks, Victor. Thanks for having me on, and I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone who's hung in there for this last hour to listen to crazy me.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.